very emotional. And it reminds us why we need to hold these buggers to account. I'll tell you, trying to steal our votes. The next speaker is going to wind it up, and then we're going to have questions from the floor. Is Stuart Parker. He's a historian, a political activist, a lecturer, and he's at UBC, SFU, all over the place. He's had an incredible amount of experience with electoral change, and has just had a huge experience, which I think we really need to lean on. We need to know how to respond to these people, and thank goodness there's some good opposition in Parliament, but they tend to not listen to that, and in fact disparage it and don't care. So, Stuart, you'll wrap us up.
Absolutely.
I appreciate it.
Well, thanks very much for inviting me out to Maple Ridge. One of the reasons we're starting a bit late is because Ian, my friend in Fairvote, and I had an interesting time navigating our way here. We got a wonderful tour of your neck of the woods. Very fortunate to... You think it's simple, but you have no idea the kind of idiocy we can apply. Imagine if we had to go somewhere difficult. We wouldn't even be here yet. So, first of all, let me just begin by saying that what we're dealing with here is an absolutely predictable part of Stephen Harper's agenda. One of the problems that we have in this country is that people have this innocent desire to say, Stephen Harper and the Conservatives, sure, they may be different and be from a different club, but fundamentally, aren't we all trying to achieve the same things? Aren't we really all trying to build a society that, has these basic values? And the answer is no, absolutely not. Stephen Harper and his party are not fools doing a thing badly. They are one of the smartest governments this country has ever seen. It is just that their values are absolutely antithetical to yours and mine. And so they've created this situation. Here we have a panel of 1, 2, 3 activists for proportional representation. Now, what is going on here when people who are committed to a program of activism to get rid of the first-past-the-post voting system, to get rid of the current Elections Act, are here defending it? How bad must the new act be if Fair Vote Canada is showing up to say, for God's sake, save the current first-past-the-post Canada Elections Act? That's the magnitude of the problem that we're facing. This is, for those of you who saw the movie Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? I think that's the closest to the election that we have. It's like, oh God, we're with this guy. At least he's just, handing out booze and stealing money. He's not, one of these people. So who are these people, Stephen Harper and his crew? Well, they are the people who are sponsored by the Koch brothers in the United States. They are the American Tea Party. And we know from the United States what their agenda is when it comes to people's voting rights. Now, I made some bad life decisions and found myself living in Missouri during the 2012 presidential primaries. I was in Kansas City the day Rick Santorum won the Missouri Republican primary. And I was immersed in a culture in which Stephen Harper would move easily, with people who shared his values. And one of the first things that you have to understand about this culture is that they go back, they see the original American Constitution as the epitome of democracy. And so one of the first problems they would see with the democracy we have today is that too many people are voting. And in particular, too many poor people and too many non-white people. You think that there's no element of hyperbole here. If you want to look at the changes they are making to this act, the way they have come up with their Elections Act changes is to ask the question, What are ways that we can identify young people, poor people, and non-white people, and without labeling them as such, rescind their right to vote? That is the purpose of this law. 600,000 people are to be disenfranchised under this law, and they are not evenly distributed across the country. Now, in the lead up to the last American election, I lecture in American history at SFU, so I take off my fair vote hat and put on my American historian hat and say, in the lead up to the last American federal election, a number of Tea Party-controlled states enacted new election laws to attempt to stop poor people and black people from voting, in the hopes that in these close states, Mitt Romney would beat Barack Obama. One of these governments was the government of Pennsylvania. And the government of Pennsylvania came up with a voter ID law that disenfranchised over 50% of the population of the city of Philadelphia. A city that is 80% black. Now, do you want to know what color these election laws are? Go to an Indian reserve and try and find a piece of photo ID that is approved under this act. Try and find a piece of ID that lists a person's address on a reserve in a way that functions under this act. This is highly targeted. There are Indian reserves across this country where over half of the people there will lose the right to vote because of this legislation. Now, there are other places where there are people that Stephen Harper knows are not his biggest fans. And we heard a very eloquent statement about what happens when people are in poverty and they need to have ID. It's not just about storage. If you look at the list of accepted pieces of ID in the Act, they have something in common. You have to pay for them. You have to buy a driver's license. You have to buy a passport. Try using your Ontario Health Insurance Program card. It's free. It's not covered under the Act. It's government-issued photo ID, but you haven't paid for it. Therefore, it's not on the list of permissible forms of identification. That's because Stephen Harper and his friends in the Tea Party believe that people who cannot pay a fee to vote should not be allowed to vote because, as Thomas Jefferson would say, they lack the requisite virtue. So let's be very clear about what's going on. It's why you see young educated people, Harper's also afraid of them. That's why their student ID won't work under this legislation. And why the addresses of their student residences won't be accepted.
Why?
Because student ID is not one of the permitted forms of identification. And the way their residences are listed, they will often be a P.O. box. Post office boxes do not count under the law. This is not unintentional. This is, in fact, stuff that was tried and done in states across the U.S. in 2012 to prevent Barack Obama from winning the election. This law is not an innovation. It is a carbon copy of Tea Party voter suppression legislation from the United States. Now, the way you deal with Tea Party voter suppression legislation is you don't go and lobby a Republican congressman. Stop talking to these Tory MPs. If these people could be convinced of sense, everything would already be different. There are two things that we need to do, and these are the two things that allowed the Democrats to be returned to office in the United States. One is to fund a court challenge. Only the Supreme Court can stop this law. If you think the Senate or the Governor General or the Tory backbench are going to do it, you don't understand their philosophy and you don't know who has appointed them. Fundamentally, the Supreme Court can stop this law, but only if we raise sufficient funds for a court challenge. The only other way is to assume the law is going into effect and do what organizations like ACORN do. Start getting people ID. Go to poor neighborhoods, go to reserves, go house by house, start organizing that ID. because we cannot assume we're going to win this fight. And we have to make sure, first of all, that people know they are losing their right to vote, and second, to assist them in spending the money, getting to the government office, doing whatever it takes to buy that BCID, to buy that passport, to defend our individual neighbors' rights to vote. Thank you.